want to go over next is, I believe in Mastermind 3, we talked about.
What in the world? What is that?
Who is that?
Someone's printing.
That's me, sorry.
Oh.
That's my printer.
It sounds like someone was like marching or something. Okay, so back in Mastermind 3, we talked about the wholesaling transaction process, okay? Remember, you know, when we started this challenge, I know we cross over so many things, and the most important thing is I really wanted to go over the fundamentals. And the reality is when you learn how to wholesale, it already has all the fundamentals. In wholesaling, you gotta find buyers. Well, number one, you gotta find deals, which is what we've been working on. Number two, we got to find buyers. I saw many of you already wrote some buyers on your buyers list. Some of them I even know, which is great. And then, of course, selling the deal. And, you know, when I say selling the deal, you could either be selling it to somebody else for quick cash, or you might be selling it to yourself, right? And maybe you want to do a renovation on it yourself. So again, it's all about finding the deals and then, you know, making sure you have buyers on your list and, of course, selling them to those buyers. And so if you guys, I'm going to share my screen real quick, but this is a document that I saw that I shared with you in Mastermind 3. I'm just going to bring it back up. So this should look familiar. Okay, so everyone can see this?
Yes.
On screen? Okay, great. So does this look familiar? I know Mastermind 3 was some time ago, right? So we talked about where we found deals, building rapport, making contact with agents and direct to sellers, writing the offers, giving them some options. You know, you don't just have to write everything on the MLS for cash. You can offer a seller finance or creative deal. You guys learn from Buddy, and you learn how to use the financial calculator so you can come up with some other ways to close deals other than just cash. And then, of course, you know, it's all about presenting the offer and, again, creating those relationships and then getting it under contract. The next part, big part, and that's equally important, is also building a buyer's list. Now, through all these conversations all of you have been having throughout the challenge, I'm sure you are running into buyers, okay? I'm sure when you're out driving for dollars or walking neighborhoods, I'm sure many of you have seen maybe even some bandit signs. Those are buyers. When you guys were trolling Craigslist, there are potential buyers there. And one of our masterminds, we even talked about finding other properties when you're comping them and seeing other flips and looking up who were the people that did those flips. Those are potential buyers. And remember, we talked about how if you had some friends that had access to the MLS, that maybe they could pull specific cash buyers in your area so you can build a buyer's list, right? So again, we also mentioned that there is, you always want to qualify your buyers, right? I know Karen has said this many times, and I've said this in the past. I like to meet buyers and get to know who they are, where they buy, what their limits are. You know, some people like to stay in the lower price ranges, maybe 300,000 or less. You know, or some people are willing to do high-end rehabs. That's a different kind of buyer. And so every time you are able to distinguish, you know, what types of buyers you have, then is when you get a deal under contract, you'll know exactly whom to call, right? And there's certain buyers that fit specific criteria. You guys know me as a buyer. I like to buy within 40 miles of where I live. You know, I gave you some buying criteria. Our buying criteria is typically $600,000 or less, right? And of course, there's exceptions to everything, but you know, those are on a case-by-case basis. You would have to make a case for it. I like to buy condos as well. Not all buyers like to buy condos. So again, knowing your buyer makeup is really important. And all of you should know in your, oops, let me bring this up, in your call log, okay? So this is where, so let me just go here. Let's go to Jarek's. In Jarek's call log, this is a great place where you can store who your buyers are, right? And like what we've been talking about, a list of hard money lenders and transactional funding, right? So this is a great place where you can store this information, and it's all in a spreadsheet that you guys are all familiar with. But again, I like to write notes on who my buyers are, so that way, and I'm sure Karen can attest to this, when we have a deal under contract, you know, she can go specific to certain people and get that property sold right away. Now, when we sell our deals, obviously it requires marketing to our buyers. And hopefully by now you would have pre-qualified your buyers. You know, I'm all about questions. You know, there's a list of questions in your folders, in your mastermind meetings, on how to qualify your buyer. And I think I brought that up in a couple of meetings ago. So look that up and go back to, I think, mastermind number 5, when we talked about buyers. And of course, you can wholesale this to other buyers, whether or not you have it under Perusnik's name, whether you have it in your personal name or your own entity's name. So today, what I'd like to talk about is how do we wholesale that? Like, what are some different ways on how to wholesale a deal? Okay, so let me pull this up. So I'm just going to go ahead and open this up to you guys because I'm missing my document here. But what are some ways on how to wholesale a deal? What have you guys heard?
Well, I don't know if this is what you're asking, but I communicate with quite a few wholesalers now, and they send me, we've discussed what criteria I'm interested in, and they send me, you know, an email blast with an address and details and pictures if they have them, and then I'll call them to ask more about it.
Mm-hmm. And then what happens?
And then I'll do an evaluation if it's something that seems like a good possibility for me.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the times I feel like a lot of the wholesalers that I talk to, they, I don't think they do their own evaluations necessarily.
They don't bother, right? They just throw it
Yeah.
out there and see what people will offer.
Yeah.
I mean, that's certainly one way to wholesale it. So
Yeah.
I get where you're going. You're absolutely right, Mackenzie. So this is the process. So my question to you, has anyone ever walked you through how do you actually wholesale the deal? So let me ask you this, Mackenzie. For example, Margaret has this deal under contract and you called Margaret, right? And Margaret blasted it out and you're one of her buyers. And so just like what you're saying, you call Margaret and you're like, hey, what's up? Right? You do your eval, you're like, okay, these numbers work. And even with her wholesale fee, you're fine. So for example, maybe she got the deal under contract for $400,000 and she's wholesaling it to you for $420,000. Okay? So at this point, what do we do? You have it, Margaret has it under contract. She has escrow open, right? And now we have to get you in there as the buyer because you want to buy it. So you're going to bring in the money, right? Which is her wholesale fee of $20,000 plus whatever she has it under contract for, right? So now you got to come in and you're going to pay $420,000. So what do we do at that point? How do we get that contract from Margaret's name to Mackenzie's name? Or let's just say Margaret LLC, or how about we'll say Zach LLC to Woodcock LLC. What do we do? Any ideas?
Instructions to escrow for vesting change.
Perfect, right? We already talked about this. This is our most basic way to assign it, right? So Margaret's going to say, look, escrow, on my offer, it says on section 6, vesting to be determined in escrow. So I've talked with my CPA. You don't have to say all this. You can just say, change it to Woodcock LLC. But if they were to question you, just say, look, I talked to my CPA and this is my funding partner and we need to do it in this entity instead. Okay, so all we're going to do, again, is substitute the buyer. Okay, we call this substitution of buyer. And all escrow has to do is do an amendment and say, now the buyer is Zach LLC is now Woodcock LLC. Boom. Jarek, Grace, you guys okay with that? Sometimes what escrow will do is they're going to ask the agent to even write up an amendment. Some escrows will say, oh, well, we need an amendment from the agent in order to do an escrow amendment. In that voice, right? And then, and so Margaret's going to go to her agent, let's say it's Grace, and just say, Grace, we're going to change the entity that's closing this because it's my funding partner and we need to put it in this other entity. Can you tell escrow by making an amendment that the new buyer is Woodcock LLC? We're still closing, everything else stays the same. You okay with that, Grace? All right, pretty basic, right? Logical, we can explain that out. So Grace is going to send that amendment to escrow. Escrow is going to make an escrow amendment. Everything's amended, and now Woodcock LLC can proceed. Woodcock LLC, question.
But if it's a wholesaler, they're not going through an agent necessarily to purchase, and the agent's just going to be okay with doing that anyway.
Oh, great question. So your question actually, okay, I'm talking about if there was an agent involved.
Okay.
Say you were on the MLS. But even easier, if you were direct to seller, guess what? Margaret would just have to talk to her seller. Let's say her seller was John, right? And say, hey, John, we're still closing, but listen, escrow wants you to sign something that says, we're going to close in this entity instead. Are you okay with that, John? I mean, everything stays the same. We're still closing in 10 days. You're still going to get your money in the end, but I just need to do it in this entity instead. Are you okay with that? Perfect. So now Margaret's going to tell her escrow officer, hey, we need to change this. Go ahead and do the amendment. And the escrow officer is like, great. I just need to make sure everybody knows. She's going to send that to John and have John sign it. John's going to get his money no matter what. He doesn't care, right? So easy peasy. Questions? Substitution of buyer, we call that. Yes, Jared.
Now, I know on the RPA, we always put seller's choice. What if the seller's choice of escrow company and title company cannot handle that part, whereas they're not kind of educated in the investor's part of the deal? You know what I'm saying?
Okay, that's fair enough question, Jared. And I can tell you this. We buy a lot of deals from sellers where the agent always stipulates that it is the seller's choice.
Right.
Right? Always. I can say 98% of the time it's seller's choice. Right?
That's right.
Okay.
We educate them, Jarek. That's the answer. We educate them. So they might not know how to do it, but we know how to do it. Is that what you mean? Like?
No, right. Yeah. No. I'm not questioning of what we can do, but then if per se their seller's choice of escrow is not competent enough to really handle it on an investor part of it, saying that they don't know what to do. This was brought up to us, as a matter of fact, by Michelle and Jessica down in Landwood Title.
Mhm.
That not a lot of escrow companies can do that stuff, whereas they're more investor related rather than just traditional, buying and selling properties.
Okay. So, Jarek, you make a really great point, right? Obviously, it's a lot easier to assign and wholesale when you're working with an investor-friendly escrow and investor-friendly title, okay? But I can tell you 98% of the time, it's going to be your seller's choice, and so you got to play. You got to play with their escrow company. And it's the same thing, Jarek. It's the same explanation, right? Look, I talked to my CPA, and I got to do it in this entity. So just substitute the buyer. All the other terms remain the same. It's just that we're closing in this entity right now. Escrow officers are very accustomed to writing up amendments, and agents are accustomed to writing up amendments. Okay, so it's a very simple thing to explain. I'm just trying to give you the logic behind it so that there's no argument there. There's no law that you can't do it in this other entity, right? Or there's no law saying that, look, my funding partner wants it to be funded in their name, right? They'll understand why. They're bringing all the money in, right? Okay, but let's go on. Let's move forward to other options. right? So hopefully this will clear up some more stuff, okay? So again, the most basic way is substitute the buyer. And this is kind of how we set up all of our assignments, right? In our offers in escrow. If you guys recall, if on our contracts straight to sellers, it's written in our one-page contract that this contract can be assigned. You guys remember that? It's clear. It's absolutely crystal clear that you can assign it. So if I tell the buyer that, or the seller, that I'm assigning this to my partner entity, there should be no question. It's on the contract. It's totally legal, right? Okay. So what are some other ways? Okay. Let's say they don't go for your logic, Jarek. So let's say Margaret wants to wholesale it to Mackenzie, and your escrow or your title company is just like, no way, no how. We're not doing it. Okay. Well, Margaret can simply say, hey, look, I'm adding a funding partner to my deal. Okay. I'm adding a funding partner to my deal. So I need you to add Woodcock LLC to the contract because they're bringing in the money. We're going to go in this 50-50 or whatever you want to say, right? Okay, so now Zach LLC makes the deal with Woodcock LLC. You're both going on title, okay, as joint tenants, for example. And Zach LLC says after the whole thing closes, right? I mean, is it perfectly legal? If I went and put an offer in as Iris, right? And then later I want to add my partner or my spouse, can I do that? Will escrow let me do that? That's totally perfectly fair, right? Or let's say I wanted to add my mom because she wants to do this deal with me. Will escrow let me do that? Can you explain that away? Could Margaret say, hey, I want Woodcock LLC added as my partner? Yes, totally logical and explainable, right? So Zach LLC is on the contract. We're adding Woodcock LLC, okay, to the deal, right? And now we're closing Zach and Woodcock LLC. Now, at the end of the day, after we're closed, Woodcock LLC says, hey, this is my deal. I'm rehabbing it. Get out of here, right? So Zach LLC says, hey, no problem. I'm going to quit claim off this property. Just give me my wholesale fee. How much was my wholesale fee?
20.
20 grand. Boom! You just assigned it. Now, both of you went and completed the contract together, right? But now this is how we get Zach LLC off, right? So Woodcock LLC brings all the money. They go to title together. And once we're closed and finished with that nasty seller escrow, we take Zach LLC off by quitclaim. Okay, everyone know what a quitclaim is? Okay, cool. All right, so that's another way. So we can add a buyer to title and then remove them for your wholesale fee. All right. And then we just use a quitclaim deed. All right. Or we can do, and we kind of talked about this earlier, a double closing, right? We can use transactional funding, right? We have to go A to B and then B to C, right? But the most critical thing here in this transaction is make sure you have that end buyer, right? And this double closing, okay, oftentimes, this is so funny, you guys. I always like, I get grief, you know, sometimes from escrow companies, and they're like, oh, it's illegal to do a double closing. And so let me ask you this. Agents in the Brady Bunch realm here, agents here, let me ask you this. Have you ever sold a property where, let's say, the person that was buying the property was contingent on the sale of their house? Have you ever heard that? Have you guys heard that? Let's say John lives in a house and he's moving in to a house in Beverly Hills and he has to sell his house in Hollywood, but he's using the money from the Hollywood sale to buy his house in Beverly Hills. So that transaction is a little complicated. It's all got to happen on the same day, right? He's got to close his house And then all the funds from his house has to go to the second escrow to buy his next house. Guess what that is? That's a fucking double closing. Do not let any escrow people tell you it's illegal. They do it all the time. Would you guys agree? That's a double closing. And oftentimes it happens on the same day.
And what Iris just described too is not even using transactional funding. That's when you actually use the funds. Yeah, you can do it without that too. You just use, the thing is when you do that, you have to pay two sets of closing costs. So that's a little extra fee, but if the money's worth it, do it. But then transactional funding can make it so you're actually completely closing the first deal before you're selling it. So that in that case, you're selling the property, not the paper.
So I just bring up that example because don't ever let an escrow officer or a title company or an agent tell you doing a double closing is illegal. Okay? This is, there's another name for it. What is it? Not a double closing.
Simultaneous close, but they don't really, I don't know if they even call it that anymore. I think that name has been eradicated.
They said that at the title company. Or
Oh, they did? Just recently?
Something like that.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So I just want you guys to push that out of your head if anyone has ever let you understand that doing a double closing is illegal. They actually do happen all the time. I've seen this happen where, let's say someone who was buying a house had to sell his boat. Okay, 2 different escrows. Hello. And the day his boat closed is the same day he bought his house, right? Isn't it kind of a double closing? Think about it. It's just money from one transaction that's going to the next transaction. So I don't want you to ever think that doing a double closing is illegal, okay? Has anyone heard that? Am I like beating a dead horse when no one's actually said it's illegal? Okay, so that's another way, right? We can just simply do a double closing. And if you have to, like Karen pointed out, you know, it can be funds from, you don't have to use transactional funding, right? What if you use the funding from the C buyer, your end buyer, right? Think about it. It's kind of the same thing. So anyway, double closing. All right. Another way, a fourth way. So again, this whole segment is I wanted to show you 6 ways to wholesale a deal. So number 1, we're going to change the vesting. Number 2, we're going to add you to title and remove you for your wholesale fee. Number 3, we're going to do a double closing, whether you use transactional funding or do it on the same day or do it in 3 days or in Mike's case, 30 days, right? Do a double closing. And then number 4, we can simply use a grantee, okay? So a grantee, let me explain something real quick. I asked you guys if you understood what the difference or what a quit claim was. Can anyone tell me what a quit claim is?
Somebody's removing your name from the title, right?
Sure, yeah, so it basically states that you're already on title and you're just claiming off someone's name on title. So oftentimes you see this instrument used, let's say if a husband is trying to do something sole and separate property, right? So he's going to take his wife off, right? Or let's say a son, a mom and a son or daughter are on title together and they want to take the daughter off, right? So you would use a quit claim in that situation. So that just assumes that there are more than one person's on title. And so just a really basic document without having to open escrow or anything, you can record this at the county recorders, which where we're going tomorrow when we do NODs is where you record stuff. It's kind of cool, right? So you can take that quit claim and record it there. It's kind of awesome. So, but anyway, that just assumes that you are already on title and you're taking someone off. This next method of wholesaling a deal is by doing a grant deed. Now, a grant deed means that we are changing title. Whenever you buy something, there is always a grant deed that's written up, okay? And what that means is the grant deed is the instrument that takes the current seller, right, that grants ownership to the new buyer. So whenever you have a transaction in California, there is always a grant deed. So don't mistake this with a deed of trust. What's a deed of trust? A deed of trust is an instrument
Recording a lien.
that is a lien on the property, right? So if you get a loan from Bank of America, they record a deed of trust and that and a note, right? So the deed of trust memorializes this note, and your note is the promise to pay, right? If you were to do seller financing, you would do the same thing. You would create a note and record a deed of trust, so it's against that property, okay? A grant deed actually grants title, ownership of the house to somebody else. The seller is granting title to the house to the buyer, okay? So I just want to be very, very clear. A deed of trust is for like a lien that's against the property. If you have a deed of trust, if Bank of America has a deed of trust and note against your house, who owns the property? You do, not Bank of America. Okay, Bank of America has a note and deed of trust against the property, but you are the owner because when you bought it, that previous owner signed a grant deed. Okay, we clear? So there's a lot of words here that have deed in it. Now, in other states, for those of you that are out of state, what is that document called? Does anyone know? In California, we call it a grant deed. In other states, they may call it a warranty deed. If Greg was here, he'd probably know this. In Indiana, they do warranty deeds, not grant deeds. So just that's just dependent on your state. Okay, so again, back to the fourth way we can wholesale. And I only recommend this if you know the person you're buying from. Okay? If you have a relationship, let's say, with that wholesaler. But in the event, Jarek, that let's say escrow won't play, or let's say it's an REO and they won't change the vesting, and we don't want to spend to do the double closing, they could, that buyer, that original wholesaler person, I could fund that deal and we can close in their name. Why not, right? If I know them and I've done business with them, we can go ahead and close in their name. That's not a problem. And once we close, then we can grant deed it. Then we can grant deed it to the new person, okay? So it's kind of similar to the quitclaim methodology, right? But this is in the event if they don't allow us to add anybody, they don't allow us to change anything. So the whole point here, Jared, is that there's ways around everything, right? If you have an escrow company that's giving you a hard time, well, try the next method, try the next method.
What you're saying, though, is that in that case, we're closing in our name with their money, right? You're saying we fund it and close in their name, but if we can't switch it, it stays in our name with their money, and they would only do that if they trust us.
Oh, yes, absolutely. There's got to be trust involved. Thank you, Karen.
It's the other way around, but they would fund in our name, and then we deed it over.
Yes, so if we were wholesaling it and they had trust, we can use their money, and then we would grant deed it off to them. Or if you were on the other side of it, if you were the buyer, same thing. Okay? All right, so that's number 4. Number five. You can sell the property in a land trust. Have you guys heard of land trusts? No one's heard of land trusts. Okay, well, let me just say this. In May at Invest Club, we're going to have Randy Hughes come, and he's going to speak on our platform. And he talks about putting properties in title holding trusts, not revocable trusts, not irrevocable trusts, but title or land holding trusts. Okay? It's one of those great ways that you can buy and wholesale properties using an entity that doesn't have anybody's name on it, just changing the beneficiary. Okay, so I just asked, has anyone ever heard of a land holding trust, a title holding trust? No, okay. So I'm not gonna get that much deeper into that. Just make sure you guys are all members, come in May and check it out, okay? So it's just one methodology. So I'll give an example. Has anyone ever seen a property or run into a seller where there was a trust that was holding it? usually when there's a trust, it probably means somebody died, right? And now the trust owns it, right? And now the trust is selling it. Well, a title holding trust is kind of the same thing, but it doesn't have all like the family stuff in it. It's just the property is held title in a trust. And what's really great about this is typically what happens is we call these trusts according to, or you can call it anything you want, but to keep it easy, if your property was on 123 Main Street, you can call it Main Street 123 Trust, right? And then Margaret will designate, let's say in that trust, that the beneficiary of that trust is Margaret Zach, right? And when she decides to wholesale it to Roxana, all we have to do is change it to the beneficiary, that is, to Roxana. It's just that simple. But guess what? That contract was made under the trust. So there's no changing investing, no changing in anything. Everything stays in the trust. So it's a slick way of doing it. And you don't have to record these documents. If any of you have a trust, you know you didn't have to go and record that in the county recorder's office. No one sees your trust, okay? So again, if you don't know what trusts are, come in May and get schooled, okay? It's an interesting way to hold property. Many of you are concerned about asset protection and things like that. And let me just emphasize, putting stuff in a trust is not asset protection. All it is smoke and mirrors. So people don't know who really owns the property. And sometimes that's all we need. Okay?
So does the trust take title?
Yes. Absolutely.
Is there a possibility of moving it out of the trust?
Yes, you can change title, but really when it comes to trust, the most important part, Mackenzie, is who the beneficiary is.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha.
So if I had a property in trust, I could sell it to you, Mackenzie, and all I would have to do is write a piece of paper and say the beneficiary is now Mackenzie. And now you officially own that trust and whatever that trust owns. Okay? So it's a little tricky, okay? I don't want to, it's a interesting, smooth, easy process, and you have to be careful because there's other issues with it, such as taxation. You know, do they look at this as personal property versus real property? Are you able to write off the interest on it because it's personal property? But it could be a very slick way on how to wholesale deals easily without having to change vesting. Now, I can tell you this, 90% of the time, just changing the vesting works. You keep it simple, you keep it clean, okay? I'm giving you these other methodologies because you know what? People don't talk about it. And you guys are warriors. And if one method doesn't work, you go to the next one. If that one doesn't work, you go to the next one. You break down that brick wall. You just don't take no for an answer. You're a warrior. Okay. The last way I want to share on how you would change title or wholesale a deal is many of you are using Perusnik to write your offers, right, in the entity. Many of you have your own entities, right? Well, what if you had a deal under your entity, or let's say it was under Perusnik? Could I sell my entity to another buyer, right? What if they didn't want the hassle of creating another entity and filing with the state? Could I just simply sell my entity? Now, I mean, that comes with responsibility. Now they gotta, you know, I gotta do a statement of information and show that, you know, these are the new owners, and then now they have to pay the franchise tax board. But could I just as easily sell my entity? If worse came to worse, or let's say I love opening entities. Or let's say I need to get rid of a couple entities. Could I just make an offer in this entity and then sell my entity to the end buyer? Maybe they might be stoked that they came with an entity. Now, if you were on the other side of that, and let's say you were the one buying the entity, that might be convenient for so many reasons, but at the same time, I would also then have to do due diligence on the entity, right? Because if you're buying that entity, well, guess what? If that entity has any lawsuits against it, if it has any liabilities against it, now that's yours. So it's not my preferred way of going, or let's say buying. It's not my preferred way, and I'm sharing this with you because I've seen it happen. Okay, but again, it could be very beneficial in so many ways, in the sense that if they don't have an entity, well, now they just acquired one, just like that. Okay.
It also depends on the document for sale, because if you just do a general